This is Jake Bazicki with an ACT Science conflicting viewpoints question. Now, this question is asking us, this is one of those questions that provides a hypothetical situation, sort of. Well, I mean, in this case, it's actually not hypothetical, it's very real. They're talking about the Ring of Fire, which is an area around the Pacific Ocean that has a large number of earthquakes and volcanoes. The Ring of Fire is also a reference to a Johnny Cash song for anyone that is old enough to remember that or has parents that listen to Johnny Cash. Anyway, so they tell us that there's this place called the Ring of Fire in the Pacific Ocean, has an increased number of earthquakes and volcanoes, and they're asking us the increased frequency of earthquakes and volcanoes found at ocean boundaries is addressed by blank. So basically, they're giving you this real life example. Hey, there's a thing called a Ring of Fire. It's in the Pacific Ocean. There's lots of earthquakes and volcanoes right along the ocean there. This increased frequency is of earthquakes and volcanoes around ocean boundaries is addressed by. So this is the kind of question where they're going to give you a real example, relate it to the passage. You have to figure out which scientist addresses this real world scenario. So we're looking for explicitly increased frequency of earthquakes and volcanoes at ocean boundaries. Those are the three things that we're going to be looking for in each of these perspectives, because we see that it's either going to be in scientist one's, scientist two's, neither of these theories, or both scientist theories. So let's see what we can find. I'm looking for these keywords, and I'm seeing that, okay, in scientist one, that some heating and cooling of the asthenosphere, that same heating and cooling of the asthenosphere is what causes earthquakes and volcanoes to be more prevalent in mountainous areas around the oceans. All right, so scientist one, we're going to get a check mark for scientist one because it talks about all three of those things I mentioned: increased frequency, aka more prevalent, earthquakes and volcanoes, and around the oceans. Perfect. Let's look at scientist two and see if scientist two says anything about earthquakes and volcanoes around the oceans. So scientist two says that the Earth's plates collide, forcing one plate under the other plate. This pushes the top plate up, forming mountains. This process also causes earthquakes and volcanoes. So here we go again, earthquakes and volcanoes to be more prevalent around the plate boundaries. Okay, so we have two of the three. We have earthquakes and volcanoes and a high prevalence, but it doesn't say anything about the ocean here. But if we keep, so this, we might be tempted to say scientist 2 theory does not address this. But if we keep reading, it says that ocean basins are formed when the plates under the oceans, oceanic plates, are forced underneath continental plates and the void is filled with water. So this is a little bit of a tricky question because it talks about these ocean basins which are formed whenever two plates meet at an ocean. And this scientist 2 talks about how earthquakes and volcanoes are more prevalent at plate boundaries, which happen to be around where the oceans are formed, when these ocean basins are formed. So the plates under the ocean are forced underneath, so continental plates. So ocean basins, continental plates, and so where the plates under the oceans are forced underneath. So yeah, so where there's this boundary between two types of ocean plates, the continental plate and the ocean plate. So it is a plate boundary by the ocean where earthquakes and volcanoes are more prevalent. So this is a little bit tricky, but scientist 2 theory also works. So the answer has to be answer choice D, both scientist theories, even though scientist 2's is not completely explicit. And this is where if you're like, sometimes you have to read a little more than you would normally, because it's not always going to be incredibly explicit. But here it is. It talks about it in the second paragraph where it talks about the oceans.